Hi everyone, in today's video I'm going to be doing a little bit of a deep dive into how to get an accurate likeness and how to measure a human face in order to draw it. There's 5 steps to the process I'll walk you through today. It's not the only process that you can use, but it's one that I find very useful to help achieve accurate likeness when working from a photograph. Today I'm going to be drawing Tamino here on the left hand side. I've cropped the photograph so it's roughly the same dimensions as the drawing paper that I have, and that'll just make it a little bit easier for me going forward. The first stage that I like to use is to have a reference line on the face. This is just a straight up and down line, and this is the line that I will be using to measure all other proportions from. It'll also make sure that I get the orientation of the face correct, and by that I mean the face won't be tilting too far forward or too far backwards. It should be at the same tilt as the drawing reference. When drawing from life, artists used to have a little bit of string with a weight on the end, but here I have the photograph orientated so I can just make sure the line is lined up with the edge of the photo. Once I draw this on my page here, I can then have the same line to measure all the distances from. The next step of the drawing is to have the envelope shape of the head. By this I mean the outline of the face and the outline of the hair. We're not diving into details around features in this stage, we're just using a few very straight lines to map out the main shape of the head. So the goal here is you don't really want more than 10 lines, and you want the lines that you do have to be as straight as possible. So you can see here in the process I'm just really trying to figure out some lines. Sometimes if a feature is a bit wobbly, so there you can see his cheek kind of wobbles out a little bit, you've almost got to ignore that altogether. You're really trying to simplify it into as few major lines and shapes that most accurately represent the face. Now I usually go for the face, especially with a face like Tamino's where he's got very poofy hair, so it's going, it's a little bit curly and has quite a lot of volume, so for that reason I found it a little easier to focus on the face. But I mean, you can go if the person doesn't have much hair, or if they have very straight hair, sometimes just doing the outline of the hair works equally well, so whatever works for you. The only thing that I would say when you're mapping distances across is you're really looking out for angle and how those lines compare to that centre line. Some of the tricks that I use sometimes to help me establish the angle is I think of the angle almost like the hour hand of a clock. So let's see the line on the top of his face that goes straight across, so that's like the hour hand pointing at 3 o'clock, but then maybe that line along down to his temple, that's kind of more like a 4:30, and then the line from his temple down to his ear, that's almost like a 5:30 line. Now if you're really struggling to establish the accurate angle of the lines, what you can do is actually line up your pencil with the angle on the photo reference and then pivot around to your drawing, and that'll just help a little bit as well, and you'll see me doing that in a minute. So here I'm not just getting the outline of the face, you can see I've also had a little stab at the hair as well, but I'm keeping those shapes very simple, and I've also plotted in his ear. I usually try and go for the neck and the shoulders as well because those are important, and if I forget about them then I often get them wrong. So really you're thinking of the biggest shapes when you're at this stage. Now sometimes it's useful when you are around the shoulders and the hair to look at the negative spaces as well, and by negative spaces it's the spaces in between things. So if you were to fill in the background colour, what shape does that colour make? And you can just see me demonstrating it here now with my drawing. So once we've got all the major outlines of the face mapped in accurately, the next stage is to get the envelope shape of the facial features. So these are broadly the eye sockets, the area under the nose, and the area around the mouth. Now again, we're focusing on using that centre line as the reference point for measuring off all those distances, and we're following a very similar process by really trying to capture those shapes in very simple terms by using straight lines. I often think of the eye sockets as almost like a single scoop into a plaster model of a head, so we're really just scooping those out as accurately as possible. Now keep an eye on those against the centre line. If you've got someone that's looking off to the left hand side like Tamino here, then you'll see there's less of the shape on the left hand side than there is on the right hand side. And it's very important to get those relationships correct, because otherwise, and what we have a tendency to do is to really straighten up people's faces. So getting the orientation against that centre line is very important, and making sure that we get that accurately. Now, one thing that I find very useful at this stage is to use comparative measurements to get everything mapped out correctly. And I'll show you what I mean by that in a minute. But basically, the distance between the top and the bottom of the forehead is a distance that we can use to compare to other features. So you can see here that I think that that distance is roughly the same as the distance between the bottom of the nose and the bridge of the nose, and also between the mouth and the bottom of the chin. And there's a few other distances as well. So maybe you want to go from the top of the eyebrow up to the top of the nostril. So by using that measurement as a source of truth, you can then measure off other features and make sure that you're not putting the nose too high or too low, that you're capturing and putting the mouth in the right place. So picking a clear measurement like that forehead measurement, it's just about small enough that there's, that you can fit 3 or 4 of those into the face and use as a reference point. And you don't only have to go up and down with that measurement point, you can also use it to perhaps make sure that you've got that positioning of the eye socket correct along that centre line by measuring left to the side of the face. And I can see that roughly the distance between the right eye socket to the left side of the face was about the same distance as well. So I'm using that just to make sure everything is located accurately. Really, the more you measure, the more accurate it will get. Now, when you're drawing from life, it's not easy to measure everything because people move, but I think actually practicing from photo references and spending a lot of time measuring things, after a while you tend to kind of see and get a feel for those rhythms, and you don't have to kind of measure them so carefully going forward. You kind of get more of an instinctive understanding of measurements, but you do unfortunately have to go through that slow process of doing a lot of practice first in order to get that instinctual knowledge. So it does feel a little bit slow at times, but I think even just being very observant and going through the practice of measuring things and observing really does help kind of build up that knowledge of information in your subconscious that you can use for later drawing. So now that we've got the rough envelope shapes, now we're actually getting into the detail of figuring out exactly where those facial features are. So where are the edges of the mouth? Where are the edges of the eyes? Where are the nostrils and things like that? So that's really going to give you the specific distances that you need. What I find really useful for these is straight lines. So what you can do is you can measure up and down. So this using your plumb line, your straight vertical lines again. And you can look at things like, how does the eyeball line up with the edge of the mouth? How does the edge of the nose line up with the mouth and the eye? What about between the nostrils? What about between the eye sockets? So it's really kind of measuring up and down and making sure everything is in the accurate place. The one that's a little bit tricky, I find, is the edge of the eye socket. So sometimes you have to go outside horizontally in order to get that and compare that to a vertical measurement. I think that's something that I often struggle with. I do often get the eyes in the wrong place. Using the mouth as a measurement up and down is a good way to actually avoid that, but unfortunately if you've got the mouth in the wrong place, that doesn't really help so much. But yeah, it is what it is. So I think just keep measuring everything. You don't have to use vertical lines only. You can use horizontal lines. You can also use diagonal lines like I did for the edge of his eye socket across the top of his nose. That's a very strong diagonal line. I also see another diagonal line going down from his ear down to his chin, and you often see that in men, so like just the line along his cheekbone, and almost goes under his chin as well. So I think sometimes those more subtle lines, just plotting those in as well, that gives you a way to span that really long distance between the edge of the mouth and the nose and the ear. And that's often where I fall over, is that is such a long distance. I kind of struggle to compare it to other things, and measuring down, the jaw is such a kind of a round curving shape that it's very difficult to be as precise as you can be with the facial features. So just keep measuring as much as possible, really. So you can see at this stage I've got a lot of the features mapped in. It's still, not going to be 100% correct. You just want to get it close enough so that in the next stage you can really kind of dive into more detail. Another thing you want to be really careful at this stage is getting the ear correct. Maybe that's just me, I often end up putting it in the wrong place, but making sure you measure across to get that located correctly with regards to the eye and the nose is really important as well. And again, you can see on the left hand side I've highlighted some of the less obvious facial features. Again, they can be your map and your guide as well in getting accuracy. So at this stage I was ready to go into some detail. Now here we've kind of got the bare bones of making sure everything's in the right place. Now it's really about developing something that looks more like a finished drawing. So I started off by just knocking back some of those lines. If you're drawing your initial drawing very lightly, you don't have to do this, but I just rolled an eraser around it to get those lines a bit softer. Now I'm really going in and looking at the very small shapes I see and the small relations. And by that I mean I've got the drawing zoomed in. This is kind of the first time I've zoomed the drawing in, and I'm just really looking at the smaller distances. So for example, the width of his nostril compared against the top lip. How big is the gap between the bottom of his nose and his top lip, and distances like that, so much smaller distances. I'm multitasking a bit too, so I'm not just thinking about getting all the proportions accurate and everything accurately in the right place. I'm also thinking a little bit about the lines I draw, whether I want very sharp lines, whether I want soft fuzzy lines, whether I want kind of hatching. So I'm thinking about that a little bit as well. But I think in terms of if you are kind of beginner intermediate, it's fine to take those one at a time and work on the line quality afterwards. They're just something worth mentioning. So I'm not being slavish to those initial lines. I'm constantly questioning whether I believe them, whether I can improve them. I think this is why having very straight lines helps, because they're not accurate, so you can constantly improve them. So I think at this stage it is really good to take a lot of breaks, to also establish doing the same measurements that you did before, so those horizontal, vertical, and also follow the line measurements. Things like the eyes, a millimetre left or right can have a massive impact, so it is important to get those accurate. And I think doing lots of measurement definitely really helps. So don't ever stop measuring everything. Don't ever stop questioning what you're looking at. So the hair is also very important. Believe it or not, we actually take a lot of likeness from the kind of the hair of someone as well, not just their facial features. I think this is one of the issues I often have, is I kind of get the hair wrong. I often make the hair too big. And that can really change the likeness of someone if you kind of overestimate or underestimate the mass and shape of their hair. So not something that's worth kind of ignoring, I would say, worth getting right. So in terms of the edge of the face, I've talked about how there's quite a big distance from the nostril to the kind of the line of the ear, especially in these 3/4 lengths. So again, it's really important to use, and I find what's quite helpful is to measure along and then compare that to a vertical distance, because there's a lot more features on a vertical distance you can compare against. So for example, you can measure from the centre line to the hairline, and then often that's the same as the eyebrow to the nose, depending on the angle the face is at. So now we're going to do a tonal block in. This is really an optional step, but I find this is very helpful to help me figure out their accurate likeness. And when I say tonal block in here, I mean we're really squinting our eyes at the drawing on the left hand side and just characterising it into 2 or 3 major tones. You can do this quite easily actually by flipping your photograph to black and white, but squinting does about the same job. So the areas of darker tone are really his hair, his jacket, and the areas in his eye sockets and under his nose and top lip, and also under his chin. So those are the areas I'm just blocking in right now with some up and down hatching. There's something about seeing like a notan or a tonal drawing that just really helps you key into where the errors are in your drawing. So I often find that even if a drawing initially looks very accurate, once I block in all the major dark tones, and suddenly I notice a whole bunch of different differences and errors that I didn't before. So, I mean, if you are going for a drawing that has tonal, so it's not just a line drawing, then it's definitely worth adding this stage in, because it will really help you hone in on that likeness. And actually there was a few errors around the eyes that I did spot as soon as I had actually added in that area of tone. I also think it makes quite a cool drawing. I really like these up and down tonal marks because I just think they look very cool. But I mean, other artists have used diagonal hatches, or you can just kind of get a very smooth effect by doing kind of hatching in different directions and a little bit smudging. So it kind of depends on the look you're looking for, really. But I would definitely class this as part of the drawing phase because it helps you get that drawing accurate. I think another tip I would also say is always bear in mind what features are on the face of the person you're drawing that are kind of a unique and distinctive. For Tamino, it's a lot around his nose and the bridge of his nose. Also the shape of his eyes, they almost kind of tilt down slightly, and he's got a very distinctive mouth. So if it's those three things that I automatically spot about a person, then I just need to make sure that I've represented those accurately in my drawing and not really accidentally toned them down or averaged them out, because often where we get the best likeness is where we almost like exaggerate those distinctive features so that you can really clue in your brain to say, oh yes, it's that person. So I'm not talking about like a caricature, but very slight exaggeration. So definitely worth spending a moment to recognize what is distinctive and unique about the person's face that you're drawing, and just making sure that you are accurately capturing that. So I did spend quite a lot of time on his eyes. I didn't really feel like I got them accurate. So it did take me a little while to figure out what wasn't quite right with them. After the drawing had finished, I did spot it that I got his hairline a little bit too far along. So the reason his eyes looked a bit incorrect is because they were just a bit too far from his hairline, even though they were kind of accurate with, compared to his mouth and compared to the other features I measured. So I think it's always worth not just checking in on the facial features, is to go back to those basic envelope measurements and recheck those. It really only takes a millimetre or two for things to go out of whack, and as your drawing develops, things definitely kind of slide around very slightly and move around slightly. So even if that initial sketch was 100% accurate, stuff just changes as you draw, so you need to really check in on everything. So that's definitely something for me to watch out for in future. So here I'm kind of leaning a little bit more into developing like a style and a look. So I'm kind of developing some of those strong contour lines, which are kind of my distinctive style. And I'm also kind of spending a lot of time not just focusing on the detail, but just letting my eyes kind of fly around his face on the left hand side, flicking my eyes from like right to left, and just saying, what are those last little bits of detail that I think aren't 100% accurate, that I can really kind of capture and exaggerate in the time I've got left. This drawing I only gave myself an hour to complete, so it was quite a short period of time. I didn't want to kind of dive into something very elaborate or developed. I just wanted to get a rough sketch in a process that would be fairly straightforward to kind of understand and follow. I mean, not that drawing a face is ever straightforward. I think Tamino is a really great face to draw. He's got very distinctive features, so that's kind of why I chose him for this tutorial. Sometimes it's quite interesting to draw a photograph of someone whose face you understand very well, because that will allow you to really know when you haven't got it correct. So at this stage the drawing of Tamino was pretty much finished. I did do an overlay after I finished, which I'll share with you now. So you can see I was actually pretty accurate. There's some things that are not quite right around his ear and the edge of his hair, which I'm not quite sure how I managed to do it, as I measured so many times, but it just goes to show that continual measurement is always important. I hope you found the tutorial useful. Do drop any questions in comments if there's anything I've not covered, and I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks very much guys, bye bye.